this door with the key of curiosity. Beyond it is another dimension, a wondrous land whose boundaries are that of preconception. Between science and superstition, things and ideas, is the pit of your fears and the summit of your knowledge. That's a signpost up ahead. You just crossed outside your comfort zone.
Well, that was different.
Welcome to Faith on Film, where we raid your church library in search of the good stuff. So, Nathan, what are we pulling out today?
Well, it's something that you wouldn't find in your average church library. As evidenced by the fact that we did a review of Fiddler on the Roof, we review movies for any religious topic.
So, it's still Judeo-Christian, though.
Were you not listening to your own narration?
Okay. So, what religion is it?
We'll get there. In 2006, Darren Aronofsky unveiled a passion project he'd been wanting to make for years. It starred Hugh Jackman and Rachel Weisz, and upon its premiere, many people derided it as pretentious and/or confusing. But it has since acquired an undeniable cult following. So, where do we fall on it?
Well, that's what we're here to find out. Don't some people say that this is one of Aronofsky's best?
Yes, they do.
Maybe we'll agree. This is The Fountain.
So, where do we start? It's like trying to eat an elephant, but you're not sure which bite to take first.
Well, I suppose before we begin, now is about as good a time as any to bring up that Aronofsky really plays fast and loose with Mayan mythology and Spanish history, astronomy, etc. So, don't go into this thing expecting any type of accuracy.
Look at it like a fairy tale for adults. That's how Aronofsky himself described it on the commentary.
You and commentaries.
What's wrong with doing a commentary? I'm trying to understand the movie, Stephanie.
I suppose. Well, we have three narratives going on here. Hugh Jackman as Tomas the Conquistador, Hugh Jackman as Tommy the Doctor, and Hugh Jackman as the Bald Space Monk?
The Conquistador story starts in media res. But when we get his backstory, we find out that he was commissioned by Queen Isabella to go to the New World and seek out reports of a life-giving tree, which they think might be the tree of life from the Garden of Eden. The Queen wants this tree to counteract the Spanish Inquisition, which is threatening to take over Spain. See what I mean about playing fast and loose with Spanish history?
Inquisition!
Yeah, I wasn't expecting a sort of Spanish Inquisition.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition!
See, I can also make obligatory references.
Anyway, now that we got that out of the way, what would you say is the Inquisition's motive in this movie?
Well, the Inquisitor, whom we only see briefly, believes that the physical body is a cage confining the human soul. In order to free oneself, one has to rely on God. And so, any type of physical immortality he views as heretical and needs to be expunged.
We mentioned that this movie plays fast and loose with history, but I couldn't help but notice that there's a monk here who reminds me an awful lot of Anthony Quinn, but he is not Anthony Quinn, who's going to be accompanying Tomas the Conquistador, and he's a Franciscan. Which, if I'm remembering my church history correctly, the Franciscans were actually the first monks to make it to the Americas. So that's a neat little Easter egg, I suppose. But enough about fast and loose history. We have a present-day story to talk about. We have Hugh Jackman also as Tommy the Doctor and his loving wife, Izzy. And Izzy is currently very ill with a tumor. And Tommy happens to be a surgeon working in experimental research with, I think that's a monkey? Chimpanzee? I don't know my primate species well enough for some reason. Anyway, he really wants to save her, and he will go to whatever means necessary. And he's experimenting with this little primate named Donovan. Just as long as he doesn't accidentally create the Planet of the Apes, I'm good.
Well, that would be a very different movie, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would. It would be called Rise for the Planet of the Apes.
Oh. Well, anyway, one of their very first scenes together, which is actually the scene where we learn that she's sick, he's giving her a sponge bath, and she asks him to turn up the heat even though the water is already steaming. It's at this point that he realizes she's lost temperature sensitivity, which just drives home how close he is to losing her. She tries to comfort him, and they wind up kissing, and she pulls him into the bathtub.
See, Batman v Superman? This is how you can make this idea work. All joking aside, this is probably the part of the movie I was the most invested in. Jackman and Weisz have really good screen chemistry, and as Jackman is a very good actor, you can really feel his desperation as he is in this hopeless situation. And you can also, I think the thing that really sells me is you really can tell that these guys really do love each other.
This is also the one storyline that is undeniably real within the context of the narrative.
The other stories are not real.
Maybe.
Oh, goody.
Izzy is writing a novel, also called The Fountain, about a conquistador going to find the Tree of Life in the New World. So it could easily be read as that whole storyline is just a metafictional narrative that she is writing. But there are some clues that indicate it could be her memory from a previous life. So she could just be remembering it and then writing it down as fiction.
There are really three main ways that people tend to interpret this movie. Interpretation number 1, this is reincarnation. Interpretation number 2, this is a story within a story. Interpretation number 3, it's a combination of both.
Yes. Maybe. And as for how the Space Monk storyline could also not be real, Izzy says that her book starts in Spain and ends at a dying star with a nebula wrapped around it that she refers to as Xibalba, which is the Mayan underworld where souls go to be reborn. Space Monk Tom is in a bubble with the Tree of Life floating up to that nebula. So that could either be the ending of the book, or Tommy also successfully reverses the aging process in several of their test subjects with a compound from a tree that they got from South America. So it could also hypothetically be him millions of years in the future keeping himself alive with this tree. Maybe.
Again, this is very open to interpretation, especially when you factor in that Izzy asks Tommy to finish her book for her, as she's written all of it except for the last chapter. So, interpretation number 1, this is really Tommy millions of years in the future, and he's finally learned to let her go. Interpretation number 2, by writing the conclusion of the book, he comes to the same letting her go, but in present day.
There is no official answer. Aronofsky has described it as being like a Rubik's Cube. There's a lot of different ways to solve it, but only one solution in the end. That's probably why the film didn't do well upon its release.
No. Seriously, if the spinning top at the end of Inception drove people crazy, I imagine this movie just drove them bonkers.
And like the spinning top, the question itself misses the point. It doesn't matter if the top fell. It doesn't matter if the conquistador or the space monk really happened. The point is the same either way for the protagonists. Cobb's arc is resolved when he doesn't care whether the top falls, content to be with his kids either way. And Tommy's arc is resolved when he learns to accept Izzy's death and his own eventually, and make peace with both.
It just might have happened in present day, and it might have happened in the future.
And truthfully, no one interpretation is ironclad consistent. If I'm being honest, that's a small knock against it in my book. I would have preferred if they could each explain every detail, but I suppose that is a tall order to fill.
Only a lot. While at a museum, Izzy tells Tommy about the Mayan creation myth, about a figure called First Father, who sacrificed himself and the Tree of Life was born, and death is an act of creation. Ultimately, this is what happens to Tom the Space Monk. When the tree dies, he accepts his own mortality and floats up, and his remains restore the Tree of Life. Thus, death is an act of creation. He goes into Xibalba itself, and he becomes the First Father.
Assuming you take the interpretation that all three storylines are real, this means by necessity that the universe loops itself, that it is creating an endless cycle, which is an oddly Buddhist idea. Now, Buddhism has no official stance on the creation of the universe. The Buddha once famously said that focusing on that rather than dealing with suffering in life would be like trying to figure out where an arrow came from rather than removing it from the victim. But one of the several possibilities mentioned is that the current universe simply arose from the collapse of a previous one, stretching back into infinity.
It's a long time. So, this is a Buddhist movie. Why didn't you just say so?
Because it's not that simple.
Because of course it isn't. Why would it be? Continue.
Well, the movie certainly does make a lot of sense as a Buddhist text, and indeed it's popular to look at it that way. After all, if all three storylines are true, you have an endless cycle of rebirth going on, which is what the Buddha sought to escape from. And in the end, the Space Monk going up into Xibalba and accepting death would be the same as Nirvana, which literally translates blowing out like blowing out a candle. And this is then paralleled by the end of the movie, which just ends with a gentle sigh. However,
Oh, goody.
Aronofsky is also very interested in Kabbalah, as evidenced by his first movie, Pi.
We're gonna review that one too at some point, aren't we?
Eventually. Kabbalah is a form of Jewish mysticism, and I don't really understand it. One of the rules for Kabbalah is that you have to be Jewish, 40 years old, and married before you can start studying it. So, I don't get it. So any attempt to explain it, as if I get it, would bite me in the butt somehow.
Yeah, this is the internet.
Here's what I've gleaned, and I'm going to be a very amateur analysis of how Kabbalah might relate to the fountain. As I understand it, mankind took the tree of knowledge of good and evil, thus gaining dualistic thinking. This is good, this is bad, so on. When in reality, God permeates every facet of creation, so it is all good. And the Kabbalist's map back to divine union is called the Tree of Life, and yes, the one in the movie is modeled on that, so it's a pretty direct link right there. With this in mind, Tommy's arc might be understanding that life and death are not opposites, that death is not bad, it is just as good as life, and in fact the two are inseparable. Maybe.
So, this is a Buddhist movie with Kabbalah imagery, or a Kabbalah movie with Buddhist imagery?
Either way works.
Yeah, my head definitely hurts. But all joking aside, I am glad that I saw this movie. This is most definitely the most gorgeous cult film I have ever seen. The music is absolutely brilliant. The cinematography is amazing. And the performances are also very good. The characters are likable and relatable. And yeah, everybody here does a good job. Even the supporting players that we haven't really mentioned all do a very good job.
And the effects are reportedly done without any CGI.
That's amazing.
Yes, even the Xibalba sequence. This was done with freaking petri dishes.
On the whole, I think this movie's not really my personal preference. Certain people really like the trippy, surrealistic movies, but that's just not me. This movie's fine. For me, it kind of feels like it loses its mind a little at the end. But again, that's just not my preference. So for that, I think I'm going to give it a satisfactory. Glad I saw it. It's definitely worth checking out. This is the first Aronofsky movie I ever saw, so I was a little intimidated going in. I'm sure this show is going to ultimately correct the lack of Aronofsky movies I've seen, but it was a good start.
Mea culpa, I probably shouldn't have told you how much Black Swan and Requiem for a Dream freaked me out before you saw this.
Probably not.
My bad.
So yeah, I give it a satisfactory.
Time to come out with it. This is one of my top 10 favorite movies. The atmosphere is amazing. All the stuff she just mentioned. I love the way that the three storylines intertwine and make each other greater than the sum of their parts, especially through their visual motifs interlocking. I love the way that it helps me think about the inevitability of loss and death in a way that few other works of art have. I give it a money's worth, unashamedly.
Not bad. And this is what we mean by different strokes. Anyway, thank you for joining us for Faith on Film. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Nathan. We'll be back next time with something a little more on the straight and narrow. Maybe. Guys, that's not what I meant when I said to eat of the tree. Fusing. But it has since accumulated an completely forgotten what I was supposed to say there.
Tablet to the rescue.
It's complete blank.
Ultimately, this is what happens to Tom the Space Monk. Lost again.
That's okay. Mightn't you say you're lost in space?
Fun fact, that theme didn't actually show up until season 3.
Didn't know that.